So if you guys got from that video, it's not the response that helps. It's not us fixing somebody's problem that helps. It's what? What helps? Presence, connection. And the best response you can give is not, I know exactly what you feel right now. I'm going to get you through it. It's, I am so sorry. Like my friend Brian said, I'm so glad you told me. I'm here for you. It's that connection and it's honesty. So if you watch that 3-minute video and it made sense to you and you get it, that's all you need to be a peer supporter. That's it. You don't need some fancy certification with a stamp of approval. I'm on YouTube. I'm going to stop. You don't need, and we talked about it. I just did a 2-day peer support class in Henrico, and at the end when the chaplain said, it's silly that we have this class and we're certifying people when we all should be doing this. And that's the way it is. We all should be able to be there for each other. We all should create an environment that we're not judging and stigmatizing people, and we're willing to listen and we're willing to help guide. Because for most people, 80% of the people, being there for them is going to be enough. But granted, 20% of the people, they are going to need that referral. They are going to need clinical assistance to get through. And truth be told, if all of us saw a therapist 2 or 3 times a year, we'd all be healthier. I started doing it, and man, I wish I had done it. If I would have started seeing a therapist in my 20s, my life would have been so much easier. Because we don't realize how our thoughts control us, and the negative thoughts are so automatic. So I said I would speak on company officer, and we could do a whole class on this. You could take over and do a whole class on this. But company officers, they have such a responsibility. They are that first line of defense. They should have open relationships with their people to where people know they can go to them about anything. And that's the way it should be. It shouldn't be what we've evolved to of refer to EAP, because that's what's happened. I know when I made captain, one of the questions at the end, or one of the ways I got my full points and got promoted was to refer my guy to EAP. When we teach our company officers that they should do that, they believe that they have to refer to EAP, that they're not capable of helping people. And what happens is that disconnection, first of all. Second of all, let me ask you this. If your company officer tells you that you need to go to EAP, and you go to EAP, are you going to open up and tell them everything that's on your mind? What are you going to do?
Not if I want to keep my gun.
Exactly. So what are you going to do at EAP?
I'm fine.
Everything's good. I was stressed out, but I'm okay now. I have good coping skills. Please give me a thumbs up, right? That's why the referral to EAP is damaging. It has a good, it comes from a good place of helping people get to clinical assistance, but when people feel like it's tied to their job, it doesn't work. So you have to, as company officers, you have to first of all understand mental health. And you have to understand how important it is. Because a study that they just did last year at Florida State University on PTSD, one of the reasons it found that supervisor support predicted lower rates of suicide, PTSD and suicide, was that through that support from the supervisors, the employees felt that it was okay to go and get help. The supervisors encouraged the people to get help and let them know that it was okay to struggle and that it was okay to get resources and that you're not damaged. So that's where company officers can be strong. And then creating an environment of disclosure without recourse. People shouldn't be afraid of what they're going to say, because if they're afraid of what they're going to say, they're not going to say what they should say. And then finally, company officers have to be vigilant of taunting, isolation, I will not say that correctly, so I'm going to skip, but you know what I was going for. Ostracize, yeah. They have to be vigilant of that. You guys remember my story and my company officer, he said, I see what Tim's doing, I don't agree with it, it's not right, but there's nothing I can do about it. And now that I'm a company officer, I realize that what he did was he did the comfortable thing. He did the easy thing. Because there are many times as a company officer, I want to ignore issues because I want to, is lazy? I want to be comfortable. Because it's easier to ignore issues and hope they go away than to address issues. But I constantly have to remind myself that I did take an oath, I did take this promotion for a reason, and I owe it to my people. And I have to stand up for my people. And maybe if I didn't go through what I went through, and maybe if my company officer didn't, I think, abandon me, I wouldn't feel so strongly about that. But because of that, I feel really strongly about the fact that my job as a company officer is to support my people and to step up and stand up for them. I am getting paid a little extra to do it, so I guess I have to do that. But we do have a culture, and I think in law enforcement it's different because company officers, your first line supervisors, you don't answer calls, you're separated, so it's easier to be that company officer. In the firehouse, you're part of the family. And sometimes you want to be everybody's friend, and you're afraid to be the officer. You're afraid to be the parent. But it shouldn't be that way. So this is the study I talked about. It was last year at FSU, but this is what they found, that perceived social support from supervisors is the strongest predictor of reduced PTSD. And in it, the explanation was simple. When your supervisor supports you, when your supervisor encourages you, and when your supervisor lets you know that it's okay, it's much easier to admit, yes, I'm having this problem and I need this help and I'm going to get it. Also, if anybody wants a copy of this presentation, I'll be happy to send you the PDF, and at the end I have all the references, so you'll be able to find anything that you need. None of this is my original material, none of this is my thought up. It's all stuff that I found, so I'm happy to share. So in talking about asking, there are multiple different ways to ask. The IAFF, they do their 2-day peer support class. They spend half a day on how to ask. The Fallen Firefighters Foundation, same thing. They have a campaign, Ask, Care, Take. It's all to encourage us to ask and to make sure that we stay with people and we get them to resources that they need. Have you guys ever heard of Safe Call Now? So Safe Call Now is a first responder 24/7 crisis line. But something that they do that is really amazing is they get people to treatment immediately. So if somebody needs treatment, they can get you on a plane in less than 12 hours. And in North Carolina, twice, we've had a member who was suicidal, and Safe Call Now was contacted. An officer from the North Carolina Law Enforcement Assistance Program sat with them and stayed with them and got them to an airport and got them to treatment. And it kept them from being humiliated, and it kept them from going through, the services locally. So Safe Call Now is a fantastic resource that could really help us out. But you have to have a collaboration. We're lucky we have NC LEAP. They're the North Carolina Law Enforcement Assistance Program. They have peers all across the state who will be there anytime we call, and it's easier to have law enforcement for somebody who's suicidal. But just remember, suicidal crises, they're often intense for short-lived periods of time. So if you actually can sit with somebody who is thinking about suicide and who is having intense thoughts of suicide, if you can stay with them for a day, at the end of that day, those thoughts will be much lower, and they can more rationally make decisions and be willing to get to a therapist and get to help. So, like I said earlier, one of the things we're lacking in public safety is teaching our people coping skills. That's one of the biggest things that we're lacking. That's one of the biggest changes we have to make. We have to learn how mental health, physical health, and social health are all intertwined. They're all critical. If you want your mental health to maintain good status, if you want to prevent yourself from thinking about suicide or becoming suicidal, you have to learn how to manage stress. And like I said earlier, mindfulness is the best way. It is the absolute best way. We know exercise is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. It really gets your mind off things. Again, we get too busy, we get too lazy, we don't do it. It's all about habits though. I know for me, no matter how crappy I feel, at 4 o'clock I make myself start working out. I tell myself just 5 minutes. And I've never stopped at 5 minutes. Once I get started, I usually feel good. So it's all about just having habits and making yourself go through with them. But it's also about finding out what works for you. So if talking works for you, talk to people. If you have hobbies that work for you, implement those hobbies. Faith, we talked about faith being such a strong protective factor. Follow through with your faith. Just find out what works for you and stick to it. But we have to find better ways to cope. And I do strongly urge all of you guys to practice mindfulness. Learn it. Give it a try. Give it a shot. So exercise. I know it's hard to come up with things to do at work. There are a couple of organizations out there that help first responders. 555 Fitness, they are a nonprofit. They're free. You can download their app, and every day they post different workouts. O2X, they're a newer organization, and they're pretty awesome. They post their workouts for free every day on Instagram. They also have an app that you can pay for, and they just wrote a book. It's a fantastic book. It's through fire engineering. Whole chapters on coping and on what they call Thrive, where they talk about mindfulness. They talk about breathing techniques, like the Navy SEALs breathing. I don't know if you guys know this, but the Navy SEALs, they incorporate what they call box breathing. And it is a form of mindfulness, and they do that when they're about to do something really intense and stressful, because what it does is it activates the parasympathetic nervous system and it calms them down. Box breathing is really easy. It's breathing in for 4 seconds, holding your breath for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, holding your breath for 4 seconds. What is it?
It's just box breathing. There's an app, and you can set however long you want to do it, and it'll just...
Is it called box breathing? Oh, cool. He said there's an app called box breathing. It's the easiest one to do, and it's amazing. If you count that, each breath is 12 seconds. So if you think about how it works, it lowers your respiratory rate way down. And that's what activates the parasympathetic nervous system and calms you. It really helps to sleep too. If you're having a hard time falling asleep, just slow your breathing down and count them, and you'll find that by counting your breaths, you can't think about a million thoughts, and you slow everything down, and you're able to fall asleep. Pickleball is my stress relief activity of choice in the firehouse. I highly recommend it, but that's just me. So these are a few books that help me to understand more about suicide and suicide prevention. So I just kind of put those up there. I know nobody has time to read this many books, but if you have any interest, the top right is called The Body Keeps the Score. It's a fantastic book about trauma, PTSD, how I kind of explain the brain, the prefrontal cortex and whatnot. It explains it so well. The top left is called Myths About Suicide. It's by Dr. Thomas Joyner, whose father died by suicide, and he's a leading researcher on it. Very fascinating book. It's just incredible. It's an easy read too. You can read it in probably 2 days. Tribe. That book, I think somebody said that every firefighter should read Tribe, and I believe it. It's a quick read. It's on audiobook. It's 3 minutes if you listen to it on audio, or no, I'm sorry, 3 hours if you listen to it on audiobook. Yeah, 3 minutes short. 3 hours. The media camera's here, so I got nervous. But Tribe is fascinating because it helps to explain how connectedness and why connectedness is so important. Talking about the military and understanding the military, our military members aren't dying by suicide because of combat and war and what they saw. They're dying by suicide because when they come home, they become very alienated. They lose their tribe, they lose their purpose. And in the book, he explains it, and through so much evidence, and evidence of wars in other countries, and how the common thing that people say is they kind of miss the war, because during war, there was so much unity and so much coming together of people, and it's fascinating to read that and understand that. And this book, if you read Tribe and The Body Keeps a Score, you realize that PTSD is not an injury. We shouldn't be victims and calling it injury. PTSD is a disorder of recovery. And it's not always our fault. It's sometimes the lack of support inherent in our organizations that lead to it. But post-traumatic stress is common and it's normal. The disorder is when it becomes maladaptive and you don't process correctly. When people choose to drink alcohol instead of talk. When people don't have support, it becomes maladaptive. So those books are really fantastic. The bottom right, The Neuroscience of Suicidal Behavior, it was just published in the fall. It's a fantastic read, so much information, and it really brings together some of the myths and some of the science behind suicide, and you learn in it, like they found that there's a change in white matter in the brain in suicidal individuals, and they found the genetic link, and it talked about a lot of therapies, so very good book. If you don't have time to read books, podcasts are free and they're easy. Behind the Shield is a fantastic podcast. It's got so many episodes on mental health. The top right, episode 117, Dr. Allison Brager, she's a sleep scientist. And she explains sleep and how it affects us in just a fantastic way. The bottom right, episode 27, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, fantastic episode on, it even talked about, teenagers and why they're dying by suicide, but he talks about suicide and PTSD and does just a fantastic job there. Episode 39 with Dustin Hawkins, it's 2 hours. It will make you cry. It's so good. If you have a long drive, I highly recommend listening to that one. In episode 103, Monisha Basa, she kind of helps to explain the difference between a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a therapist, why medication isn't always the answer. If you're standing on hot coals and you take a pain reliever, It's going to help with the symptoms, but until you get off the hot coals, you're not going to fix your problem. And sometimes when we just take medication, like me going to my primary care physician for antidepressants, but not fixing the underlying problem, we're not making a difference. And then episode 156, Ben Sessa, he is fantastic and speaks about treatment of anxiety, PTSD, suicide. He has a different way of thinking. He actually is treating through MDMA. And it's very fascinating. Short-term controlled uses of MDMA to help people to relax and open up and talk about their problems. So like I said, if you want a copy of this presentation, just email me. If you have any questions, email me or call me. I'll be happy to send you a PDF, no big deal. And we will take another break, and then we'll talk about peer support until lunch. What we've done in North Carolina, because our departments were so fearful of liability and doing it perfectly, they weren't doing anything. So what we did was say, let's just make a nonprofit and get people who want to be a part of it to be a part of it. And it's worked really successfully for us. We used the model that the Illinois Firefighter Peer Support Team created in 2012. And Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative, they're doing something very similar. And we like it. One of the biggest things that we like about it is the fact that peer support is not a mandated service. The way peer support works is that it's voluntary, and that it is a benefit to people, but only if they request it. So sometimes when things are in the chain of the command of the department, they somehow become mandated services, and then they're in control of whoever's in charge at the time. And we've already seen in our department with our safety chief, with him changing to a new safety chief, he was very pro peer support, and now the new safety chief is very pro cancer prevention. And for some reason, people struggle to focus on many things. So we enjoy doing the nonprofit. It's working really well for us. And what's neat about it is our nonprofit North Carolina Peer Support is just an umbrella that encompasses all the teams within. So Cary Fire Department, they have a peer support team. Their members come through our training, or they can go through the IAFF's training, whatever they want. As long as they have the training and it's approved by our state team that it's a decent training, then they're part of the team. We don't control the teams. We don't tell Cary Fire Department how to run their peer support team. We don't tell them how to do anything. It's not about us being the dominant team. It's about us making a partnership with all the teams. And that's the overriding goal, is the partnership. What we found and what works is sometimes somebody on the Raleigh Fire Department is struggling and needs help and is desperate for help, but they will not go to anybody on the Raleigh Fire Department, because it's really hard to break the stigma of what is the saying?
Telephone, tell a friend, tell a fireman.
Telephone, tell a friend, tell a fireman. Yeah, it's very hard to break that. And it's also it's hard when people worry about their professions and their reputations. So we like that we're a partnership, because if somebody on Raleigh Fire Department wants to talk to somebody outside the department, we can just make a phone call and connect them. And it works so beautifully. Also, because we're a nonprofit, we can fundraise. And with that fundraising, we can help pay for people to get treatment. So one of the things we do right now is if somebody has to go to inpatient treatment, and it's, they make the decision last minute, the flight's pretty expensive, so we cover their travel if they're willing to go. We make sure we cover their travel. Our goal eventually is to have enough money to help offset the costs, because even with insurance, if you go to treatment, you're gonna still owe between $3,000 and $5,000. But when you think about why people go to inpatient treatment, it's worth every penny, because it saves marriages and it saves lives. So you can't put a dollar amount on that. And sometimes we have to remind people of that. We have to get their internal motivation that you are spending 30 days and you're getting treatment every day. So that's why it's that expensive. So that's kind of how and why we do what we do. Yesterday and the day before, we ran a 2-day peer support class in Henrico. And the way it's working, and the goal of it is, Alex Hall, if you don't know him, he's a great kid. He works with Henrico. He wants to create a statewide resource in Virginia as well. Not to step on toes of any established fire departments or any established peer support teams, not to be better than anybody, but just to have people working with each other. Because we know there's smaller agencies that they don't have resources. Larger agencies have multiple options. At the 2-day class, the clinician from Fairfax County, Virginia, she was there. We collaborated with her. It was fantastic. Members from Charlottesville were there. So we brought in a lot of people, and there were law enforcement, there were chaplains, there were firefighters, and the clinicians. So it was neat. So we hope maybe to continue to have that ball rolling, and maybe that will continue to happen here in Virginia. Who knows? I'm glad to help, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. So peer support evolution, how did it start? And where did it come from? So in the 1920s, Dr. Henry Sachs Sullivan, he employed former patients of psychiatric institutions, patients who were there, had received treatment and recovery. He employed them to come back and serve as peers. And they found that through the peer model, people were more willing to open up and receive help and to not be isolated and alone. So they saw that that was really starting to work. If you're familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous, it works as peer support. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous is. It's basically peer support. It brings together people with similar stressors to not feel alone, and it gives them a place to be and to be connected. So Alcoholics Anonymous is one of the first organized peer supports without really being called peer support. We know CISM was created in 1974, and the CISM model is fantastic. There's been some problems along the way, you know, mandatory debriefings and mandatory this, and we know that that doesn't work. And also CISM, one of the other issues with it is it's focused on trauma of the job. So somebody struggling with personal problems or organizational problems or other stressors, they don't know or they don't reach out to CISM. So that's why it's not enough. It's a fantastic model, it works well, but it's not enough. In Tennessee, 2007, they started certified peer support specialists, and you'll see in states they have those 40-hour class, and people become a certified peer support specialist. It's still people with similar mental health diagnoses helping others. So it doesn't quite work for first responders because we don't see ourselves as having any mental health disorders or diagnoses or issues, but we have similar stressors. And that's where peer support helps with us. So the first organized team that I know of was the Illinois Firefighter Peer Support Team in 2012. It started in the basement of a firehouse, somebody dealing with addiction. They all came together and sat down and just talked, and they realized, I'm not alone. And they realized how talking helps, and how getting help, and how moving there and having support makes a difference. And that's kind of where that started. 2013, the IAFF, they created their 2-day peer support class and started rolling that out. And I've attended that class. It's one of the best 2-day peer support classes around. So if you have the finances and if you have the membership, I highly recommend bringing them in. The only issue that kind of comes with us is it's expensive. And budgets are limited, so it's hard for people to get that training instituted. And then in 2017, Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative created Red Line Rescue. Red Line Rescue is fantastic. Who was talking about crew cares earlier? Crew care is an amazing resource, but how much? It's about $1,000 a year.
It is employee dependent.
Employee dependent. So each person pays independently.
They have slots of.
Right. Crew care is a great resource. It's an app where you can get connected with clinicians, get connected with peers. The only downfall to it is the cost. For an agency to get it, it's a few $1,000s. Red Line Rescue is completely free. And they're still completing it, but Red Line Rescue is a completely free resource to where they will put peer supporters in it, their demographics, their background, their agency, whatnot. And they'll have a whole database of peer supporters, a whole database of clinicians. So somebody struggling can actually go on that app, put in, 25-year-old female struggling with depression. And crew care will generate people just like me. And I can go down the list and pick a peer that maybe I want to connect with. So crew care. Red Line Rescue. So it's not quite complete and open for everybody, but the neat thing about it is it's going to be free. And for law enforcement, they'll have Blue Line Rescue. And for EMS, they'll have Green Line Rescue. So it's a fantastic thing that Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative is creating. So what is peer support and how does it work? It's simple. It brings together non-professionals with similar stressors and health problems for the purpose of mutual support. That's it. It's very simple. We are trying to overcomplicate it, and through overcomplicating peer support, we're not establishing it. And that's the biggest problem. So if I can get just anything across today or help with any bit of confidence, it doesn't need to be overcomplicated. But you have to make sure to have the right people. In our 2-day class, I open up with a quote by Brene Brown from one of my fans, or one of her fans. I was trying to make it happen the other way. But what she says, yeah, you guys are great. What she says is, until you can receive with an open heart, you can never truly give with an open heart. If you attach judgment to receiving help, you knowingly or unknowingly attach judgment to giving help. So if you want to be a peer supporter to help save people, but you are too good to ever ask for help, you're not going to be a good peer supporter. That's the number one issue I found, is people who want to be peer supporters because they want to be the helper, but they are afraid to ask for help themselves, and they attach judgment to asking for help. We are not a society of people who need help or people who give help. We're a society of people who need and give help. At any point, any of us could need help, yeah? And at any point, any of us could offer help. And that's how it should be. So I open up my classes with that, and if you cannot get it through your thick skull that you have to be willing to accept help, I don't want you on the team. When we saw the video where the bear crawled in the hole, one thing I would add to that is, do not get in that hole if you do not have the resources to get out of the hole. Because what happens? You got 2 people stuck in the hole. So that's the only thing I'd ask. And that's why there is a 2-day peer support class. And that's what it does, is it helps you figure out how to get out of the hole. And the biggest thing that we can do to get out of the hole is learn positive coping skills and positive coping techniques. So first responder peer support, why it's necessary, what makes it good. First of all, first responders, we won't go to a mental health professional until a peer tells us it's okay to do it. We're scared of mental health professionals. And we need our peers to tell us that it's okay. So we prefer peers. That's why peer support is so important. What we found is, of course, similar experiences relate, and genuine empathy matters. So you have to have peers that do what you do. You can't have a peer support team of all non-first responders, or people who just, because there are a lot of wonderful chaplains out there, a lot of wonderful people that join CISM who don't do what we do, but they want to support us. And they're so helpful and beneficial. But sometimes we need to talk to somebody just like us, and that's what's so important. And then, of course, the benefits is the immediate availability. With peer support, you have somebody there right away. Sometimes with EAP, it's not immediate. And sometimes making an appointment with a great clinician can be months. So with peer support, you've got somebody right then and there. And what people need initially is to take the edge off. They don't need therapy right then and there. They need to take the edge off. They need to calm down. They need to feel normal before they can get to that therapy and receive the help that they need. So that's what makes peer support fantastic. So what do you guys think you can offer as a peer supporter? What do you guys have to offer? You guys are all here because you want to be, right? So what do you have to offer? What should we be offering?
Human connection.
Connection, active listening, empathy, I've heard it. And if you remember one thing that Brene said in that video, one of the most vulnerable things we can do is to drop our defenses and have that empathy. Because to have empathy, to be able to feel for somebody, it doesn't mean you have to have the same experience, but you have to know what that experience feels like. You have to know what pain of rejection feels like, or pain of loss feels like. And to feel that, you kind of have to go deep into yourself and drop your defenses and feel that pain to have that empathy. So as a peer supporter, we have to be willing to do that. We have to be willing to feel with people. Remember, there's a huge difference between sympathy and empathy. With sympathy, there's a line drawn, and you stay on this line of, thank God, I don't have what you have, but I'm here for you. With empathy, you step in with them and you say, I'm so sorry. That's got to be so hard, and I'm here for you. Thank you for opening up to me. You have to be willing to take that line away and be willing to accept that you could also be in their shoes. That's another big piece. Perspective taking is huge, taking the perspective of somebody else. And to take the perspective of somebody else, we have to drop our preoccupations with ourselves and our preconceived judgments. Think about something that you judge harshly on somebody, something that annoys you about somebody. If you think hard enough, what you'll recognize is that thing that annoys you is the thing you are most critical about yourself for. If you think about it for a minute, you'll realize that the thing that people do that annoy you are the things that you do too much, or that the things that you're not quite, comfortable with. And I recognize that and I see that, and it makes sense. So when we get into judgment, it makes us hard to be empathetic because we don't want to be like that person because we don't like that thing. We don't like it about ourselves. So just remember, when you're there for somebody, when you're being empathetic, just forget yourself for a little bit. So here are the 3 goals of peer support, the 3 primary goals. You already hit on it: connection, assistance, and then trust. Trust and assistance. When we teach the class, when all the hard questions come up, what do you say with this? How do you do this? How do you get here? The overriding theme is honesty. You tell them honesty. I don't know. I read something the other day. The strongest thing a supervisor can do is say, I don't know, but I'll find the answer. Same thing for peer supporter. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, do you mind if I call somebody else to help? But trust is huge. You have to be honest. You can't say it's going to be okay. I promise it'll be better. One of the coolest things in Lieutenant Colonel Grossman's episode on Behind the Shield, he talks about, like, what do you say to somebody who's dying or in their last moments? And one of the things he said is, don't say it's going to be okay. Don't say, everything's going to be okay. Say, the worst is over. I've got you now. And that's something we could say. The worst is over. You've opened up. I'm here with you now, and I will walk with you. That's what we want to do, is walk with people. So these are the multiple issues that can lead to crisis for us as first responders. And it's not just the potentially traumatic events of our work. It can be significant life events. We all know those happen. Family situations, economic, community. The Hurricane Florence hit North Carolina hard, and a lot of people lost their houses. And our peer support got so many calls because a lot of people were right there that they were stressed. They were stressed to the brink, and then they lost everything they had, and it just pushed them over. So natural disasters can be huge. There's so many different things, though, that can lead to us needing help. And this is what a crisis is. It's simple. It's just when our ability to cope is no longer there. When we are overcome and we can't cope, that's a crisis. And that's why sometimes just having a peer makes such a big difference, just being there for somebody. So the end goal of peer support, the goal of it all is simple. It's to take the edge off and stabilize emotions. That's it. It's not to fix, it's not to solve, it's not to make everything better right then and there. It's just to take the edge off, to help bring them down from that crisis. And a lot of times, by the time somebody asks for help, it's already way further along than it should have been. So they're going to come to you with, my marriage is falling apart, I'm losing my house, my kids are all failing out of school, my boss hates me, I just got demoted, and it's like, oh my God, what do I do as a peer supporter? You let them talk, and then you find out, okay, what's the first thing that we can do? What can we do right now? And that's one of the biggest pieces of advice that we have to reiterate with people is, it's not about solving all of their problems at once. It's about helping them to see what they can do today and what can wait, and getting them to make a decision on what they're going to do there to make that change. So the reason I like the idea, I'm happy to hear Virginia is thinking about doing the statewide model, is because peer support should be a network. It should be a collaboration of all the resources that you have. The more resources that you bring into the network, the more options you have as that bridge, and the more help you can pull together. So what you should do with your agency and with your peer supporters is, first of all, know the surrounding agencies that have trained peer supporters. Know who they are, know what their experiences are. Because there's no way that you in your department is going to have every experience that you need. So if you have that network with other agencies, when somebody loses a child or goes through something that nobody can really imagine, maybe somebody in the neighboring agency can have that resource for you. Make sure you can identify local counselors and professionals. And we've got some in the room today, which is amazing. They're getting to know us. Identify them, get to know them, find out what kind of training they have, what kind of modalities they use, and see if they're willing to come to your firehouses and talk to people or police stations. And then understand your EAP. Every EAP is different. When Chief Hobson, the one who had me look up firefighter suicide, the reason he had me do that is because he himself was under a lot of stress. The financial crisis made him lose his business, made him lose his house, had so much going on. And he got to a point where he reached out and called EAP. When he did, it was the wrong number. The number had changed. And he hit like a gazillion buttons, and they said, leave a message, we'll call you tomorrow. Imagine being in crisis and finally asking for help and not even being able to ask for help correctly. And that's what he said. He said that when he realized that he couldn't even ask for help correctly, he knew he was a loser. It was devastating for him. And the reason he asked me to research firefighter suicide is because he didn't know how to help himself. So how could he help our fire department? So I commend him for doing that and showing that vulnerability and being willing to share his story and allowing me to share it on YouTube. He's not ashamed. He doesn't hide it. He shares it. Because one of the greatest things we can do for our members, one of the greatest ways we can protect our members, is by us being vulnerable. If somebody that you really respect stands before you and says, this is what I went through, this is how I felt, and this is how I got through it, that tells the young person sitting there, or the person feeling isolated and alienated and wrong, it tells them that they're not alone and that they can get through that. Hope is so important. So I'll tell you this, there is no one-size-fits-all model. What works for Roanoke might not work for Charlottesville. What works for Henrico might not work. There's just no one-size-fits-all. My model in North Carolina with our team, it's imperfect. We find problems every day. We work through them. It's imperfect, but there is no one-size-fits-all. Find out what works for you. Pick up what you like from other people, get rid of what you don't like from other people, and make it work for you. You know, there's a lot of union-based teams in Raleigh. We're right now still only 20% union, so it's hard for us to be a union-based team because we won't be able to train all of our members. But I know the further north you go, the more members you have. So it's just in what works for you and what you have. So these are the things you need to do to get your peer support team started and rolling. Just find out what the mission's going to be and define what your program's going to be and what your goals are going to be and how it operates. I shared our policies yesterday with Henrico, which they'll get them across the state, and I'm happy to share it with anybody else here. So if anybody wants a copy of our policies, I'm happy to share them. Simply, our mission, it's so simple. All it says is that it is to recognize that all fire service and emergency medical service members are human beings who will be exposed to and experience emotions. We'll provide a safe, non-judgmental, and confidential environment where members can engage in healing conversation with a peer. We seek to share the concept of peer support and structure of our program to those who ask. It's very simple. We're there for each other. We're all human beings. We're not superhuman. I know. So this is, in a nutshell, what peer support is. Emergency responders helping each other. Confidential is the overriding theme. If somebody comes to us, we actually had in North Carolina, we provide peer support for an EMS agency, and the paramedic was stealing drugs off the ambulance at work. And he was struggling with addiction. And we connected him with a peer who had had a similar addiction. And the goal of that peer was to try to convince him to go to inpatient treatment. And he admitted that he was stealing from his agency. And the peer called me and said, do we need to report this? We need to report this, don't we? If I were to have called his agency or reported him, what would have happened to our peer support team? It would never be used again. So that's the hard thing. And that's why I do like having it outside of the agency, because we didn't report it and we won't report it. The only time we'll report it is if somebody is in danger right then or if they're endangering somebody else. But unfortunately, stealing drugs off the truck isn't doing that. Now, maybe if he was replacing it with something else, that would be endangering. So that is the hard thing. Confidentiality is number one. Once you lose confidentiality, once people think that there's any chance that their business will get out there, they'll never use you. And peer support's lost everything that you worked hard to build. Yes?
So where's the line with the situation you just explained with someone taking drugs off of an ambulance? And wouldn't that equate to other criminal activity, like if somebody was going to hurt somebody? Where does the line draw where you are mandated to report some of those things?
Well, think about what mandating reporting is. So a mandated reporter is just for child abuse and elder abuse. So there is no mandate to report. Law enforcement with suicide and clinicians with suicide are very different than the rest of us, but it's still immediate. Their life or somebody else's life is immediate. There is no mandate to report a crime. It is tough, and I know it is sticky, and I see you have a law enforcement badge on, so it is tough and sticky, and yeah, are they contributing? So what we do, and what I told Kyle, the peer supporter, you create an action plan for that person. You help them. All we wanted was to get them to inpatient. We try. And Kyle called me, he got exhausted. He was like, man, I keep thinking he's gonna do it, And then he says he's okay and he's not going to do it. And I said, tell him he either does it or stop calling you. And at a point, you have to stop enabling people and you have to put your foot down. So we take ourselves out of it. We're there for them to take the edge off, but we're not there to enable them and to hear the same thing over and over again. We'll do everything we can to get them help, but at some point, we step away from it. And I won't leave my peer in that position. If my peer's in that position, one of us will take over for him. We never call back with our phone number. We always star 67. That way, the peers are protected. So yeah, it's gray, very gray. Even with suicide, all of it's gray. And it's a risk-benefit analysis always. But the primary goal is taking the edge off of people. Again, that's what can save lives. And then creating an action plan. Day 2 of peer support is all about creating an action plan. The action plan happens through motivational interviewing. You find the person's motivation for change, and you find what they're willing to do. And then you get them to say what they're willing to do. And you can help guide them. You know, we have a wonderful clinician that we're familiar with, and I think he'll make you feel better. Or she'll make you feel better. You know, I saw this person and it helped a lot. I recommend you do this. You know, can I give you some other suggestions or whatnot? You help them make the action plan. You get them to say, I will call them, and then you follow up. Can I call you in a week to make sure that you follow through? If they don't follow through, that's when you just disengage. It's in their hands at that point. Now, if they call in crisis, we'll always be there for them. But we're not going to roll in those circles with those people. It is gray. It's a very difficult spot to be. And I'm telling you, that is the hardest, because I had to question myself for a while. Like, do I need to call this agency? Do I need to report him? But again, remember, we're just the bridge to mental health resources. We are not the end-all, be-all. We are not the solvers and the fixers. Down here, these are not all of the peer support teams. These are the peer support teams that I've worked with and I know well. FDNY, they have a wonderful counseling unit with their retirees. They do a great job. In Indianapolis, their peer support team is fantastic. Like I said, we were modeled off of the Illinois team, and then now we're partnered with the Florida team, doing great things. So all of those people are doing wonderful things, and they're all willing to share resources. So just a couple agencies to know about. So how to educate people, how to get them the training they need. Operations is that 2-day class, the 2-day peer support class. The IAFF is the most easily accessible 2-day class. Again, it's a little pricey. I heard it just went up to $9,000 for 30 people. Illinois Firefighter Peer Support, they do a 2-day class as well. Florida, they've got one. We've got one in North Carolina. And the reason we had to create our own 2-day class was because we couldn't afford to bring the IAFF. So our agencies and administrators weren't willing to bring them in. So we got frustrated. So we basically did our own research, pulled information from the IFF's class, pulled information from the Illinois class, and made what we think is a pretty fantastic program. I shared that with Henrico. I gave them the PowerPoint. I gave them all of my material. So now Alex has the ability to teach that 2-day class. And talking to Brandon, our goal is to run a couple of more in Virginia and do a few more train the trainers and just give you guys the option to have training, to get people trained. So again, there's multiple sources of training. The Share the Load is a volunteer program. Suicide Prevention Resource Center, I tell you guys all write that down. They do awesome online classes. They have a 1-hour lethal means counseling class that is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. The National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, they've got a great mental health first aid, stress first aid class. And then of course the IAFF in their class. And then again, don't forget your local clinicians. It's really neat to get them to come in and tell you about their treatments and therapies, and tell you how it works. When you hear the clinician talk about how it works, it's really just like empowering to know that it's more than just talking, that there's actually treatment under the chit chat and feelings. So this is the quote I mentioned earlier, and this I put 100% into it. One of the greatest barriers for us, not just society, but for us as first responders, is the importance that we have placed on going it alone and solving our own problems and dealing with our own problems. Just remember, until we can receive with an open heart, we're never really going to be able to give with an open heart. And if we attach judgment to receiving help, we will always unknowingly or knowingly attach it to giving help, and we won't do what we need to do to help people. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what our peer supporters do and what they're taught to do. First, they're taught to meet them where they are. And people would always tell me, meet them where they are. Have any of you guys heard that saying, meet them where they are? Did anybody understand it? Like I could not for the life of me understand what that meant. And then finally through that little brain, I realized, remember, when somebody's stressed and in crisis and they blow their lid and the prefrontal cortex is off, you're meeting them there. You're meeting them at a place where you understand that they might not be rational. They might not be able to think through. So we just need to be there to support them. When we can demonstrate our understanding of that person and we can meet them where they are, that's actually how you can help them bring that lid back down and make decisions. So it's just starting basic with them. Viktor Frankl, I love his quote. He was he became a psychologist, and he was actually working on a new treatment during World War II. And because he was Jewish, he was placed in the concentration camp with his entire family. And he lost his whole family. He lost his whole manuscript. He lost everything he had. But he kept a sense of purpose for himself and for others. And he was able to get through it because of that. But one of the things he found, and he created a new therapy, or not a new, it's an older therapy, but the logotherapy is what he created. And what he said, and it makes so much sense, is an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is totally normal. When we blow our lid and lose our mind because something really bad has happened, it's normal, that's okay. And that's the thing, is just to remind people that our abnormal reactions to things are totally normal. Everybody handles stress, everybody handles trauma differently. Some people shut down, some people disassociate, some people forget events, some people just can't put pieces together. Some people just get really angry. Everybody reacts differently, and that's okay. So just reminding people that it's okay to have these feelings. It's totally okay. Just talk about it. Talk through them. And I won't spend too much time on this, but I do include this picture that explains, the limbic brain and the prefrontal cortex, in case my hand description didn't really help. But in the prefrontal cortex, these are all the things that it controls: empathy, insight, emotion, regulation of emotion, intuition, communication. All that is in the prefrontal cortex. The limbic is emotions. It's the emotional brain in the fight or flight. And again, just remember, your amygdala receives whatever information and it makes the decision if it's going to go to your emotional brain or if it's going to go to your rational brain. And if it decides to go to the emotional brain, the rational brain turns off completely. So another thing that we teach our peers, and these are some of the biggest techniques for interactions, is be patient. Remember, like my friend Brian, he kept calling. He didn't give up. Patient. You got to wait till the person is where they need to be. Effective pause. It took me forever to understand that. I was always told the effective pause, how important it is. And I was like, what the heck's an effective pause? Until I practiced it often. So have you ever been really stressed and wanted to talk about it, but you didn't know how to, and you were kind of afraid to talk, and you're trying to figure it out? So when you're working with somebody, sometimes that's what's going on in their head. They have something that they desperately want to say, but they're scared. So sometimes a little bit of silence gives them that time to get it figured out. So silence is okay. Do not feel like you have to fill silence. And that's another issue that we find with our peers, is sometimes they're so in tune to trying to solve problems and be fixers that they don't allow any silence. They won't shut up. So one of the biggest things we teach is that effective pause. Shut up for a little bit. Give them time to think. Also, we have, all of us, including myself, we have a terrible habit of formulating our thoughts while somebody's speaking, or somebody says A and you're stuck on A and you're planning something and you miss everything else that they're saying. When you are doing peer support and you are actively listening, you have got to stop thinking. You got to turn off all thinking. And that's why we always re-emphasize that you're not a fixer, you're not solving their problem, you're just there to actively listen. And really and truly, all they're supposed to do is repeat what is said. So what you're saying is, this happened, and now you feel this way. And that's all sometimes people need to hear, is like, yes. Am I crazy? And remember, it's always okay to enlist help. Don't be afraid to be there for somebody, because you're never on an island. We have all resources. We can have each other. We can have the clinicians. We can have, supervisors, experienced people. Never be afraid to step in to help somebody because you don't know how to help them. Because just know you can always ask for it. You guys already got that training. So just to talk a little bit about the attributes of empathy and how you can be more empathetic, these 4 things will make you a good empathetic person. Being able to see the world from somebody else's lens. And you can practice it. Like if you're a Democrat, practice how a Republican thinks. If you're a Republican, practice how a Democrat thinks. That's one of the hardest things we can do, right? Practice thinking in a way that's foreign to you, or practice understanding how somebody could think that way. Practice those things. Practice with your spouse. Practice at work. Practice being non-judgmental. Practice taking your preoccupations and your attachments to judgments away. And that's how you're going to understand another person's feelings. And then the key piece is to communicate that understanding. When you communicate your understanding of somebody's feelings, that for that person is so powerful. It lets them know that those feelings are normal and that they're not losing their mind. Has anybody ever experienced shame? Yeah. So shame, believe it or not, is a universal emotion. We've all experienced it at some point or another. But like I said earlier, it is the key denominator that is killing us. Because shame tells you that you're wrong. It tells you that you're damaged and that you're flawed and that you're not like everybody else. And that's why people suffer in silence. It's because of that shame. So it's all about just creating the culture through modeling vulnerability, through sharing our stories, through just being open to let people know that they're not alone and they don't have to feel that way, through just kind of slowly chipping and cracking at that zero defect mentality we have and erasing the socially prescribed perfectionism. We have to find a way to allow people to make mistakes and not be damaged goods. We do that to people too. So in first responders, this is how we deal with our difficult emotions. We like to take the edge off on our own. And how do we take the edge off? Adrenaline junkies, drink. All the ways that we choose to take the edge off are the opposite of what helps. Because what helps?
Meditation.
Talking, connecting, sharing, yep. Meditation, getting your mind right. When we numb negative emotions, when we choose alcohol to help us sleep, when we choose alcohol to make us feel better, when we go to our corner and shut down, I do that. I've been doing this peer support stuff for a while now, and I still, when I get stressed and I know I'm supposed to talk, I know I'm supposed to reach out, I teach people to do it, I go like get in my corner and hide from the world. And those are terrible, terrible ways because you're not dealing with the problem. So unconsciously, a lot of times, we do those 2 big things, drink and isolate and stay busy. And we never address the problem. So it's all about just moving away from those things and learning how to address the problems and change the habit loop. I was going to play another video, but we are not going to go through that again. So in the end, the greatest thing a peer supporter can do, and I want to reiterate, when you leave today, you can be a peer supporter. You do not have to attend a 2-day class to be able to help people. You can help people. Do you guys agree? Yes. I don't know why we have made it to where we are afraid that we can't, but you can help people. And creating hope is one of the greatest things we can do for people. So where I said shame is a universal emotion, hope is not. Hope is a learned skill. People are not born with hope. People are not more hopeful than others. Hope is something that we learn. And so as peer supporters, we can help people learn. We can help people know that they can get through it. And it's simple. Set realistic goals. Find out how to get to those goals. Believe in yourself and be persistent. Because along the way, there will be setbacks. Finding a clinician, the first 2 you talk to might not work for you. You have to be persistent and try again. And sharing that with people will help them through. Because what happens is when we have a setback, what do? Yeah, we give up. We get pissed off. I hear it all the time. You hear first responders, they're like, I saw a therapist. They didn't get me. They don't get us. Screw therapists. Nobody should ever see one. I've heard it. Has anybody ever heard that? But that's not true. Just didn't see the right one. We talked about that. I like to include this. Has anybody read the book, The Power of Habit? It's a really, really good book. And it's a simple one. Again, the rules of 3. So how bad habits and how good habits work. You have a cue, and that signals to your brain to do the automatic thing that it does. So the automatic thing is your routine, and sometimes it's a bad habit. And then you get your reward, and that's the habit loop. And it's automatic. Our brain has automatic negative and automatic positive cycles. So the key is recognizing that and changing your routine. And we can do that, but we have to be aware. That's where learning mindfulness makes a difference. It teaches you to be aware. So if you have a bad habit, I'm not going to say it's easy. It's not easy to stop drinking. It's not easy to stop smoking. It's not easy to do any of that. But what needs to be done is you need to be aware of it, and you need to replace it with something. And that's a way to get through it. Am I right? You're an addictions counselor. I feel intimidated talking about things in front of addictions counselors. So for me, and this definitely doesn't relate because it's so much easier. It's not the same as addiction. But for me, I could not stop watching my daggone iPad in bed before I went to sleep. It was a terrible habit. I had to watch Grey's Anatomy for about 45 minutes before I could fall asleep. And I couldn't stop. I could tell myself I'm not going to do it, and I kept doing it. But I had to consciously force myself not to, and then I had to replace it with the Kindle. And then, not a tablet, but the actual e-reader that has no blue light. And it took a little while, but then I haven't touched my iPad in months. Like, I won't do it. I don't want to. I don't have that desire to. So we have to consciously figure out how to replace those bad habits. That's why AA works. How often do people go to AA? Every day. And the reason for that is it's forcing them to change the habit. And after, do you know how long is it before a habit is replaced or can be replaced? 90 days. And at the AA, it's always 90 days. That's why mindfulness-based resilience classes, they do them for 8 weeks. Because you have to, and that's only 45 days, but it won't happen in a week. And that's why doing a 4-hour class on coping skills in a fire academy isn't going to give people coping skills. You actually have to give them the skill through that. And in academies, you can do that. You can do that so easily. Again, pickleball. I love pickleball. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about mindfulness. Let me know when you want to break, if you want to break.
Right now, what are you looking at time frame-wise?
Do you guys want to break and eat lunch, or do you want me to try to finish this? Yeah? Okay. So break.